Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to this running of the IT Governance webinar on using international standards to improve cybersecurity in the European Union. My name is Alan Calder. I'm your host and main speaker for today. My background is in ISO 27001 and cybersecurity, but from a business perspective. And one of my fellow directors and I, Steve Watkins, led the world's first organization to achieve certification to what was BS 7799, the forerunner of now ISO IEC 27001. And that was back before the turn of the millennium. And I've been building IT governance as a specialist supplier of books, toolkits, products and services for the support of organizations addressing information security within the context of achieving broader, wider business objectives for about the last 12 or 13 years. We work with, as a company, clients across the whole of Europe, while our substantial client bases in the United Kingdom. We work with clients right the way across the Euro area. We deliver consultancy and a range of technical security services, as well as training courses, and we have delegates from across the whole of the Euro area on training courses that we run. So we have an involvement in cybersecurity across Europe, but also globally. We work with clients right the way around the world, all on broadly based information security, cybersecurity, ISO 27001 projects. What I'm going to be talking about today is the nature of today's cyber threats, looking at some of the most recent high-profile data breaches in Europe, touching on some of the upcoming legislation, some of it of more immediate importance to organizations than others of it, in particular the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. And we're going to look at how ISO 27001, the international standard for a management system to deal with cybersecurity, can help organizations address both cyber threat and compliance requirements. So let me deal first with the current cyber threats, and of course there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions as and when you, particularly at the end of the seminar. During the seminar, if there are questions, please do use either the chat function. You'll see at the bottom of your control panel there's a box called chat. You can type a message in there and send it to me. I'll see it, or alternatively you can use the box called questions, and if you type a question in there, I'll be able to see what there is going on. And I'll be able to respond to any questions that you've got coming up during the course of the webinar. So in 2014, across the world, there were 1,500 individual data breaches. That's not records breached, because there was about 1 billion records compromised globally in 2014. That's a very significant impact on the way in which organizations, and in particular individual companies, are able to see that their data is looked after. 4 in 5, for instance, of Irish companies suffered a data breach in 2014, and 83% of organizations across the Euro area believe that cyber attacks are amongst the 3 biggest threats facing their organization. This is in line with both the United Kingdom and the European Union cybersecurity and risk management strategies. In the United Kingdom, the government sees the cyber threat as a top 4 national threat, on a par with terrorism, and that's very similar to the European Union's approach to managing risk. It sees cyber risk as one of the most significant risks across the whole of the European Union. The landscape, though, is changing, and to give you an example of the way in which it's changing, it's not a monolithic, this is always the type of threat. It's changing in line with the evolution of technology, so that, for instance, 87% of iPhone apps have been hacked, 97% of Android top 100 apps have been hacked. That really means that downloading any one of the in the store Android apps that you think you're going to install, there's a reasonable prospect that 3 out of those 100 will be safe for you to do so, but not the balance. And think of app insecurity as being the kind of event where when you log on to what you think is your ISP to access the App Store and download an app, what you actually log on to is an attacker who looks like your ISP, and the app that you download or the operating system that you download brings with it the kind of malware which enables a remote attacker to be able to operate the phone controls, to be able to operate the camera, to be able to collect and exfiltrate data, for instance, passwords, and other information that you think of as being confidential. So not only are mobile phones the subject of regular and sustained attacks, but phishing has become a well-established industry. There are 156 million phishing emails sent every single day, and while we might think that we recognize a phishing email because it's, or was anyway, relatively badly written, very obvious in its request for you to provide information that you shouldn't, more modern, more sophisticated phishing emails are virtually impossible to distinguish from the real thing. We've seen phishing emails where the only difference between it and the real thing is 1 character difference in an email address. Everything else is perfectly exactly a replica of what you might expect, and usually in those emails there's only 1 or 2 links which you're being asked to click on. Most sophisticated phishing has moved on from asking you to provide important confidential information into a web form or onto a website, and now asks you to simply click on a link which will download a piece of malware which will exfiltrate that information in any case. 15 million of those phishing emails are making it through our spam filters, which means that you're in with a reasonably good chance of having a phishing email hit your email system. The average global cost for every stolen record is 128 euros. In Germany, it's above that average. In France, it's 161 euros. So a broad range across the European Union area, but certainly not inexpensive on a on a stolen record basis. You think about 1 billion records stolen in the course of the last 12 months, that's an awful lot of impact on the organization. And of course, the impact on the organization is not just simply financial loss, it's reputation damage and all of the other components of what happens when you're breached. And the root cause of data breaches is relatively clear. 42% of breaches are caused by a malicious or criminal attack, a deliberate attack on, let's be clear, not on you as an organization, but a deliberate attack on particular types of vulnerability. So the fact that there are particular vulnerabilities, might be in software, open source operating systems, is what an attacker targets. They look for organizations that have a particular vulnerability in their shopping cart, for instance, and will look to exploit that on an industrial scale across the internet. So malicious or criminal attack is the first root cause of data breaches. The second is simply human error. And data breaches, from a practical perspective, are caused by anything that means that information ceases to be available, ceases to be confidential, its integrity is compromised. And human error, including deleting files, deleting records by mistake, all of those are the cause of data breaches. Remember that data protection legislation requires personal information to be protected, and the fact that you sent out copies of a personal collection of personal data to somebody who shouldn't receive it is simply a human error, but it's still a data breach. System glitches, failures of systems cause slightly fewer data breaches, 29% in comparison to 30% caused by human errors. That gives you a sense of the root cause of data breaches. when you look at organizations and ask yourself, how did they come to suffer these data breaches? Well, 65% of instances, the malware evaded existing preventive security controls. In other words, the existing preventive security controls were poor, they hadn't been patched, they weren't up to date, they were inadequate for the risk that was coming, and as a result, the attack was able to bypass security controls. Now, from a management point of view, when you think that you have the security of knowing that you've got effective controls, but you don't know whether more modern attacks are able to breach them, actually knowing that you've got security, believing you've got security, can be as dangerous as not having it in the first place. And closely allied to the inadequacy of security controls, the fact that the attacker is able to bypass them, is the lack of in-house expertise. If you don't have in the team somebody who is able to identify attacks, put in place the appropriate and most useful defense mechanisms to deal with them, be responsible for and be accountable for how information security is tackled, that broad range of inadequate in-house expertise is going to contribute significantly, as it did in 35% of the cases. Many of the breaches, some 20% of them, came through the supply chain. So if you're an attacker and you're looking to get into a large target, your best way in is to compromise the, let's say, the email system of a smaller, less well protected supplier, because any emails which you send out are going to be quite evidently the real thing. They won't even need to look as though they're spoofed, and all you have to do is put a piece of malware into the email that goes out, and you can rely on the fact that your target will click on the link. So inadequate supplier security in 20% of the cases, and often organizations identify that the root cause of their failure to avoid a breach is poor leadership, and that could be poor leadership at the CISO, CIO, or CEO level, and mostly it's poor leadership in the sense that there is no CISO, there is nobody who is accountable. As you see, 6% of the cases were through lack of adequate accountability, but no one who's genuinely given the accountability and the resources to deal effectively with information security. Those are the key reasons for data breaches. The underlying and ancillary include issues like not really knowing where confidential data is stored, not having it effectively classified so that you can be sure that appropriate protection is being applied to it, and a number of other equally straightforward issues to deal with. When you look at the broad range of breaches, one of the conclusions that you leap to is that the problem isn't a lack of spending on technical security controls. The problem really is a lack of coordinated management of how you deal with, identify, and respond to cybersecurity threats. And the trend in Europe is that things are getting worse. So in the last year, we've been often been called the year of the data breach. I don't know why that's particularly significant, because 2015 will be the year of the data breach, as will 2016. Massive data breaches are showing how effectively attackers can abuse weaknesses in businesses and governments. And in the last 12 months, we've seen both SSL and TLS under attack, the Heartbleed and Shell Shock vulnerabilities, demonstrating that open source software is not necessarily as secure as some people would like to have you believe, that the fact that open source software is free and easy, cheap to deploy, so-called, also means that it comes with a cost that attackers can see the vulnerabilities and can design attacks to exploit those vulnerabilities. And the range of violations means that internet users, their trust has been compromised, also potentially compromised by the range of evident abuses by authorities of information security surveillance privileges. So The release of data by Snowden and others indicates that our governments are not being necessarily as careful of our information as we believe they should be. That, combined with massive data breaches, means that people are increasingly suspicious of the internet as an environment. Interesting case study, an iron plant in Germany where hackers had detailed technical knowledge of the ICS, the industrial control systems and production processes, and they were able to put together an attack which caused actual physical damage to the plant. This is unusual, but nevertheless, the knowledge of how the ICS worked, the ability to compromise the control system, meant that attackers were actually able to get into and damage the plant itself. The route-in allegedly was through a successful phishing attack that enabled attackers to lay their hands on key access information, which enabled them to get into the ICS. And if staff had been trained on spotting and responding to phishing emails, if there had been an information security management system in place which recognized the breadth of threats, the type of threats which the organization was exposed to, the organization might have been able to avoid the successful attack or spotted it happening and been able to respond quickly before the organization suffered from significant damage. We've also seen a number of attacks on European Union governments over the last 4 or 5 months. So just taking the most recent, Dutch government had its websites taken offline just in February this year. Their backup plans, quote, proved to be useless. The attacker was able to compromise things, and because there, it appears, hadn't been adequate real-life testing of backup and recovery from a major attack, well, the sites weren't able to be got up in reasonable time. German Parliament and Angela Merkel's websites were attacked and brought down allegedly by pro-Russian hackers in January. Again, countermeasures were taken, but they failed to halt the attack, indicating, if you like, that we might talk even at a government level about our effectiveness in dealing with attackers, but we don't really do any comprehensive testing of our ability to respond to serious focused cyber attacks. This looks like it was the first successful advanced persistent threat, or APT type attack on a German government website, but we only think of it as the first successful APT because we don't know how many others have not yet been discovered, which might have been in place for quite a lot longer. Remember that your typical APT is in place for 12 to 18 months before it's tackled, before it's discovered. It's collecting and exfiltrating valuable data. It's perhaps putting in place attack tools that an outside attacker can use at an appropriate time. And the fact that you haven't spotted the APT doesn't mean that it's in there. Broadly speaking, our experience indicates that if you're pretty sure that there is no APT on your system, but you don't have a comprehensive method of sweeping and monitoring across the whole system, including in places where nothing usually happens, then you probably living with a false hope. In December, a bunch of hackers claimed that they'd successfully stolen the whole national Serbian database, with some 7.2 million Serbs, therefore, at risk of fraud and identity theft. Not a bad outcome for attackers. You can sell personal information, particularly when it's complete, solid, at a reasonable price per record. In December again, the Pirate Bay raid meant that hackers were able to get hold of Swedish government logins and leak those. 38 government email addresses, which were mostly based in Sweden, were leaked in retaliation for a police raid. All of them good examples of how the capability of attackers is such that even our governments, which we believe are immune or are well defended, are not able to effectively defend themselves. So, unprepared for cyber attack. ineffective contingency plans, if we actually have contingency plans in place, are the common mistakes across those governments who were successfully attacked. And while the websites were restored, the lack of effective security has been exposed. That means that attackers are going to get in again. And repairing the kind of vulnerabilities which an attacker can expose isn't a matter of hours. In most organizations which are subject to this sort of scale of disruption, it means that the information security weaknesses, the management system weaknesses are endemic, and the process for repairing and changing those is a multi-year task. And during that period, the organization can be hacked again and again and again. So while taking down websites of governments might be a way for opposition hacktivists to express their opinions, it might be a way for pariah governments to demonstrate that they're beyond the law, which allegedly happened with the North Korean government attacking, for instance, the websites of Sony. None of these are things which, as individual organizations, whether in the public or private sector, should give us any confidence that cyber criminals won't be looking around themselves and saying, well, if governments are so insecure, isn't it going to be that much easier to get into the websites and the critical infrastructure of private sector organizations? And Sony is a perfect example of exactly what I'm talking about. Sony was hacked a year or so ago. The PlayStation network was hacked, and the private information of a number of people playing on the network, young people who had passwords and access accounts, was compromised, and Sony failed to identify it, failed to respond quickly, and when they finally did, it was a bit of a public relations and business disaster for them. They didn't learn from it. In November of 2014, hackers were able to infiltrate their corporate computer network for Sony Pictures in this instance and release substantial sections of unreleased Sony Pictures films onto the internet. More importantly, they were able to release information about employees, families, family addresses, salary details, and so on onto the internet. And even more embarrassingly, they were able to leak information about what Sony executives thought of a number of key actors in their films. Most embarrassingly, a file containing a wide range of passwords in clear text was leaked. It was easy for almost anybody to get a copy of the file, and as that seemed to have come from the CIO, that's particularly embarrassing for Sony. Particularly embarrassing that a critical thing like a file of passwords should A, exist, and B, if it exists, not be encrypted to whatever the highest possible level of algorithmic security might be. A whole bunch of marketing slide decks leaked to the pleasure of competitors, and the net outcome was that Sony staff were unable to use their computers for a number of days while the security team tried to deal with the issue. They had to postpone release of one of their films. Small mercy, it appears that the film made more at the box office as a result than it might have done, but there isn't any evidence to suggest that it made back enough to help Sony recover from the much greater damage caused to it by the successful attack. So Sony blamed North Korea. We got some escalated tensions between North Korea and the US, although I find it sometimes difficult to tell when the tension is escalated and when it isn't. Ex-employees are looking at a class action lawsuit against Sony. Costs have so far apparently reached something in the order of 88 million euros, and that's without really taking into account any of the longer-term damage to its reputation, without taking into account any of the longer-term damage to its relationships with stars of what they might hope would be upcoming films. What we know of the attack, it appears that there had been a number of ransom demands which Sony executives ignored, treated them as spam, said let's not do anything about this. Nobody had taught the Sony executives that occurrence of unusual things that look as though they could compromise security should be treated as information security events at the very least and be reported. Nobody thought they should do that. There was a breach. They didn't actually acknowledge it until a week after it occurred, by when it was way too late. All indicative of a generally lax approach to online security. Spent 220 million euros on security since the April 2011 hack of the PlayStation network, and overall Sony's network still not up to scratch. So if I was a cyber attacker, I'd probably be thinking about where else I might be able to attack Sony, on the basis they clearly haven't got to grips with how to deal with security. If you're thinking that security is an issue for big companies only, you're wrong. You're wrong, because attackers target vulnerabilities, not companies. They look for the shell shock vulnerability, they look for Heartbleed, they look for specific vulnerabilities in shopping carts or in operating systems. Quite often they're looking for vulnerabilities for which they've got specifically designed and developed exploits. You can sell an exploit for a previously unknown vulnerability for something between $250,000 and 500,000 euros. On the black market, obviously, because a cyber criminal knows that they've got a week to 10 days usually, during which they can use that exploit to attack that vulnerability, to collect data and payment card records and personal records and confidential commercial information before the vendor of the breached software is able to put together a patch and get it widely enough deployed. And even once they have got it deployed, there'll still be a sizable percentage of organizations which don't get the patch in place. How many organizations do you think have successfully patched Heartbleed and shell shock vulnerabilities, which have now been around for many months? The current estimate is that maybe half of all organizations have actually patched those vulnerabilities. So, you know, if you're an attacker, your payback on the investment in an exploit is going to go on month after month after month. So small organizations are a great target because they have even less resource to close down vulnerabilities. They're much less well managed security-wise than large organizations. They don't have dedicated IT security and support. It's usually quite easy to compromise passwords and system access. Smaller organizations are quite often using outdated server hardware and software. Windows XP, for instance, a operating system which has been withdrawn for some time, is still deployed in a sizable minority percentage of small organizations. Windows XP is now very straightforward to exploit. It hasn't been patched for a long time. Websites often built on common open source frameworks because it's less expensive than having them built on a proprietary framework. Well, remember, the thing about open source software is that cyber attackers can see the code as well. And if you can see the code, you can see the vulnerabilities and you can work out how to exploit them. At least with proprietary software, you know two things. You know that the code is not openly available, and B, you know that the vendor has a direct interest in dealing with and patching vulnerabilities as fast as they possibly can. Nobody has that particular interest around open source software. So you would think in this cyber insecure world that boards and top management would be paying attention. The reality is that while a majority of boards are, some 32% of boards, management boards, don't receive any information at all about their cybersecurity postures and activities. Nothing, nada. 38% of the remainder get a report only annually, and you can bet your bottom dollar that report is not saying we've got a huge number of exposures, we've got a huge number of problems we haven't dealt with in the last 12 months because we still don't have enough budget. Those are broadly going to be saying we're doing the best we can with the resources we've got, is what that annual report is going to be saying, because it's an annual report going to a board which isn't paying much attention and just wants to be able to tick a box saying that information security is under control. In fact, 29% of IT teams don't report breaches for fear of retribution, for fear of being told that being breached is your fault, you're the head of IT, you're the CISO, it's your fault that we're breached. It's not our fault that we didn't give you resources, it's not our fault that we didn't help you determine which assets needed what protection, it's your fault that we're breached. And so many IT teams will just see there's a breach, try and deal with it, push it under the carpet, and make sure that that nobody finds out about it. It's just under a third of breaches, therefore, are never reported. What to do about that? Well, the first challenge is there are simply not enough cybersecurity professionals. The current rate of take-up and demand suggests that we'll, on a global basis, be short 2 million cybersecurity professionals by 2017. And that's in spite of schools and universities, particularly universities, jacking up their effort to get people trained in computer science. The number of people who are doing computer science degrees is still vanishingly small. Not enough of them are coming out with an interest in technical security. The number of people doing security qualifications is inadequate. There's a global shortage of cybersecurity professionals. And ISACA, the American Information Security Controls Association, reckons that according to their membership, 86% are aware of the shortage, with 54% of their members reporting difficulty in finding skilled candidates, and therefore a consequent decision to increase investment in staff training. So you've got to be recruiting, you've got to be spending money on training your own staff, you've got to be putting them through industry recognized qualifications like ISC squared, like the ISACA range, like the IBITGQ range, because those are all qualifications which are designed to ensure that your cybersecurity experts have the breadth of skills and competences that might be needed to deal with today's cybersecurity threats. And in our experience, one qualification is useful, but there are probably between 2 and 4 that most middle and senior cybersecurity professionals will need. It's not just cybersecurity threats, though, that we have to deal with. The legislative framework is changing as well. And in some parts of Europe, the comment would be about time it changes for everywhere else, and in other parts of Europe, the response is, oh gee, this is going to be tough on us. The reality is that where data protection legislation is concerned, we currently don't have a level playing field across Europe. In some countries, the protection for private citizens is significantly greater than it is in others. So, for instance, in Germany and in Holland, the protection for personal data is significantly greater than it is, for instance, in say, the United Kingdom. So the European Parliament and Commission have been debating now for a couple of years what will be called the General Data Protection Regulation, which, when it comes out, will apply to any business that controls or processes personal data within the European Union, regardless of size, and therefore it will apply to organizations based outside the European Union but who are processing data inside the European Union. There will be a single directive and a single regulation which will unify data protection enforcement across the whole of the European Union, bringing data protection principles into line with the 21st century, bringing into place a requirement, for instance, that all organizations over a small minimum size have in place somebody who can provide a minimum level of expertise around information security, data security management, that a range of training will be in place for all people who are involved in data security, that specific roles will have protected status, and a number of other similar and related roles where a failure to comply could lead to fines of up to 5% of global turnover, which in many organizations' cases could be quite substantial. So General Data Protection Regulation coming into course, it's been, the final stages are being negotiated and have been for some time. Current expectation is it will be put into place sometime in the course of 2015, with probably a 2-year transition period before organizations have to be able to demonstrate their compliance with it. Alongside that is the Network and Information Security Directive, which requires European Union member states to adopt a common level of network and information security across the states to make sure that information security incidents are handled effectively. And that means a single national competent authority and a computer emergency response team in every country. And while this doesn't have a direct effect on public and private sector organizations operating, it does of course have an indirect effect, because as the single national competent authority drives information security requirements, so there will be expectations on organizations for what they might do when contracting with government bodies in terms of demonstrating their information security posture. So in the United Kingdom, for instance, there is now a requirement for small and medium organizations that are contracting for particular ranges of services with public sector, central government bodies to achieve something called Cyber Essentials certification, which was a security certification brought out by the UK government in 2014, and which is being made a requirement of public sector contracts from October last year for lower levels of security requirement. It's a low-level security requirement, and you'd expect to see more and more of those types of schemes happening across Europe as individual states look to respond to the requirements of the NIS. So a survey of information security and compliance officers identified that while 66% of them understood the impact of the legislation, only 20% of the organizations believed they'd made adequate or full preparations to deal with them. And of course, while that might not be a major issue, because while NIS is a directive, the General Data Protection Directive is not yet passed, and there will be time to implement it. The reality is that the vulnerabilities exist now. The reality is that attackers are able to exploit the vulnerabilities right now. There are a range of concerns that FireEye, when it did this survey, identified in rolling out effective cybersecurity, which you can sum up as saying cost and complexity are probably the two most important concerns that organizations have. The complexity of the policy that's put together, 18% of organizations identified that as an issue. 23% identified the cost of implementing more effective information security as an issue. 23% also identified the amount of investment that might be required for new hardware and software as an issue. Of course, sourcing sufficient expertise is a challenge. We've already seen how big that is as a challenge. And all of the related enforcement, incident reporting, and all of those create significant challenges for organizations. But cost and complexity remain significant challenges to organizations. Those same organizations recognize that the biggest problems that they experience as a result of successful breaches are damage to reputation and damage to customer confidence. So 58% see loss of business or revenue as an outcome, 58% are concerned about potential fines, 57% about damage to reputation, 54% about decreases in customer loyalty. And then, of course, legal costs, consultancy costs, requirements to carry out security audits, all of those come with significant costs thereafter. And of course, it must make sense, therefore, that you get to avoid legal, consultancy, and restitution costs by spending the money up front. Yes, there might be some costs involved in implementation in hardware, software, processes, and policy, but better to spend the money to get it right for all time than to have to spend the money repetitively on dealing with breaches. 62% of organizations said they had no clear guidance on what they should do. So, clear guidance on what you should do on meeting the new and emerging and current regulations. You should have a strong security posture. That's the starting point. Make sure effective information security supported by effective information security incident response planning, and that usually means a person who's responsible for information security in the organization, however small, a CISO, information security manager, whatever the appropriate title. And the way to get there increasingly for organizations is to implement some form of recognized information or industry standard. And that's really the third area that I want to talk about briefly, the increasingly widely recognized single international standard for information security best practice, which is ISO IEC 27001. The 2013 version of the standard has now been in the market for about 18 months and is seeing increasing growth in organizations using it as the basis for demonstrating that they've taken information security appropriately seriously. So it's a best practice framework for addressing the entire range of cybersecurity risks, and it's a best practice framework because, amongst other things, it deals with getting a balance between people, process, and technology right when you put controls in place. It's a standard for a systematic approach to manage information security. So it's not just about put this set of information security controls in place, it's about how to manage information security in a way that meets the requirements of the business. And the steps that you'd go through to implement ISO 27001, they don't require a great investment. It's a relatively low-cost activity which, embarked upon, can bring significant improvements in the information security posture of the organization very quickly. Of course, you have to determine what the scope of your information security management system, the ISMS, will be. And to do that, you've got to consider the context of the organization and who might be interested in how you go about information security, which might include customers, stakeholders, regulators. All of them will have expectations about how, as an organization, you manage information security. Somebody in the organization needs to be responsible for information security, and that person should drive a risk assessment. Risk assessment is what makes ISO 27001 special, because unlike PCI, which sets a number of specific controls you have to implement, ISO 27001 says that the organization should select controls on the basis of risks that it identifies and on the basis of its appetite to risk. Having identified risks, you appoint an owner for each risk, and the owner of the risk is then responsible for putting in place appropriate policies, procedures, technologies, processes for bringing the risk down to a level that's acceptable to the organization. ISO 27001 requires that staff across the organization are trained both at a general awareness level as well as around specific competences for cybersecurity, requires you to conduct internal audits so you can provide internal assurance that information security is being managed effectively, and builds in a requirement for continual and ongoing improvement to the ISMS. So ISO 27001, there is a growing body of evidence which indicates that organizations with ISO 27001 are able to win more business. They're able to speed up their response to requests for quotes or requests for proposal, which often come with long, complex questionnaires. Increasingly, you can simply provide a copy of your certificate of compliance in response to that. Simplify your working relationship with customers. So significant market opportunities, significant benefits to organizations in terms of winning new business, in terms of meeting requirements to bid for new business, and in terms of maintaining business once you've won it. And that credibility with staff, with customers, with partner organizations, that ability to demonstrate to your own board and stakeholders that you're complying with corporate governance and legislative requirements is all part of the range of outcomes that you get from a systematic and informed approach to managing risk. And you get out of it the ability to make a much more balanced decision about which technologies and processes and people to invest in terms of tackling information security, because you can do that on a risk-weighted basis rather than just throwing it at whatever appears to be the flavor of the month. So the So ISO 27001 certification brings multiple benefits. The assurance that your customers, stakeholders, and organizations are going to get from the fact that you're able to demonstrate that you are cyber secure. And remember, you're demonstrating that you're cyber secure because you have a third-party certification body, which could be any one of the certification bodies which is accredited by a national accreditation body will carry out an audit within the internationally recognized certification scheme. You'll have an independent audit with an independent certificate of compliance, just like for ISO 9001. Everybody around you knows that you've taken an appropriate approach to manage the security of their data. And that's good for credibility and confidence. It's good for trading internationally. ISO 27001, which is certified in France, is accepted at face value in Germany and Holland and England and vice versa, because it's an international standard, and organizations which certify to an accredited body within the European accreditation framework that brings recognition across the whole of Europe for the accreditation. ISO 27001 also supports adherence to multiple compliance requirements. So if I take the UK as an example, where there are some 75 different laws that deal with information security, ISO 27001 appropriately implemented can support and demonstrate how the organization goes about adhering to all of those compliance requirements. You can use ISO 27001 to bolt on compliance with, for instance, the requirement to have a SOC 2 audit report, to have PCI. You can tie it into a PCI framework. You can tie in a cloud controls matrix framework. All of those can be built into an effective ISO 27001 management system. Those are some of the reasons why the take-up of ISO 27001 across Europe is now starting to accelerate. We saw a 24% increase in the number of organizations certified in 2013. We're seeing that rate of acceleration itself accelerate, and we're expecting that over the course of the next 5 to 7 years we'll see the same increase in take-up that we saw with ISO 9001 and 14001, where the number of certified organizations goes up approximately tenfold. So we'll go up to something like 250,000 to 300,000 certified organizations across the world over the course of the next 5 to 6 years. So the question becomes not should we be doing this, but much more when should we be doing this. And you can see how some larger organizations trading across the globe have already decided that now is the right answer to that question. So Google apps have ISO 27001 because it demonstrates to their clients that any data they store in Google apps will be appropriately protected. Amazon Web Services look for it as a method of demonstrating to their wide range of cloud service customers that their security is appropriate. Microsoft have it in place because it provides, quote, external validation that they have a comprehensive and effective approach to managing security risk in their global business. We, as a company, recognize that. We work with, as I said, organizations around the world. We've helped now well over 150 organizations achieve ISO 27001 certification. That's organizations we've worked with directly. We've trained thousands of people who've gone on to work in organizations that have pursued ISO 27001. We've sold documentation toolkits and software into thousands of organizations that have pursued ISO 27001. And we've been at it for some 15 years or so, and our mix of tools, consultancy, training and support is not only a unique mix, but the way we've packaged and made it available to our clients is itself unique. We've recognized that when tackling ISO 27001, organizations want some certainty around price. They want some certainty around what they're getting and how long it's going to take them. So, for instance, we've created a set of very straightforward packages of products and services, starting from something we call the basics, which is the basic documents that you need so that you know what you're doing, delivering ISO 27001 yourself, all the way up to what we call Get a Lot of Help. Get a Lot of Help is a mix of online training, a set of documentation toolkits, software tools, and much more importantly, online mentor and coach consultancy, which is designed to help you manage your way through to achieving ISO 27001, usually within a 3-month time scale. All of those packages particularly Get a Lot of Help supported by a guarantee that you will achieve certification within the agreed time frame, assuming that you do the things that we've agreed with you that you will do. We're sufficiently certain of our own track record in helping organizations achieve certification. We've worked with such a wide range of certification bodies that we provide that as a standard guarantee on all of our Get a Lot of Help and consultancy projects. For small businesses, we have something called a fast track. Our most recent clients for fast track, which is where we basically do everything for an organization with less than 20 employees. We get you certification ready very quickly, ideal for small organizations that have to meet customer requirements within a limited time frame. We've signed up, and we deliver all of these across the internet. They're all of them structured, tested, planned, and delivered. And we deliver Get a Lot of Help and fast track services to clients from West Coast America through Europe, Central Europe, and into West Asia and into East Coast Australia, South Africa. So pretty well all corners of the globe we currently deliver these types of services to. As I said, they're delivered across the internet, so you don't have all the dislocation of consultants turning up, but you have the benefit of being able to draw on extremely experienced expertise with a set of tools that enable you to implement a management system that gives you what you need. All of these come with fixed prices. We believe that organizations should know what it's going to cost them to get secure rather than an open-ended deal. So the basics is 530 euros, and our Get a Lot of Help package, which has a substantial chunk of human time in it, is just over 11,000 euros. But that just over 11,000 euros, let me be clear, is a 27th of March up to 27th of March only offer. Usually it's 12,595 euros. You can obviously go onto our American site if you wanted to and buy it in a US dollar equivalent if you want to take advantage of the variant in rates. I don't think there's actually much leverage to get there, but it's 11,295 euros till the end of March, and that gets us moving, helping you get ISO 27001 into place in a way that meets your business objectives within that kind of time frame. And you can read more about all of those on our Euro website. It's a European Union-based website, transaction all in euros. There's the web link. You can see our solutions and read more about them and what's involved in all of them at that site there. But ladies and gentlemen, whatever it is you decide to do, you need to be addressing cybersecurity now if you're not already doing it. If you're not addressing cybersecurity, I can assure you that there are hundreds and thousands of individuals and organizations out there who are addressing your cyber insecurity. That brings me, ladies and gentlemen, to the end of what I'd planned to say. What I'd like to now do is deal with any questions which you've got coming up. The way to raise questions is take advantage of either the chat function, type a message into the chat function and I'll see it, or use the question area and I'll pick up the questions from there, and that will enable me to answer. What I'll do with any questions that you pose is I will read the question out so everybody knows what the question is, and then I will share with you the answers. So first question is, should we wait for GDPR to come into place before we think about cybersecurity to save implementing best practice? Twice the answer is no. You should deal with cybersecurity right now. You have national data protection laws you should be complying with right now. So you should be implementing ISO 27001 right now, making sure you comply with your current data protection legislation in your own country of operation, and then upscaling to meet the requirements of the GDPR as it comes into force. How similar will the GDPR be to standards like ISO 27001? Well, not at all. ISO 27001 is a standard with a set of controls for how to ensure that the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information is preserved, whereas the GDPR is a set of rules about the standard to which data has to be protected. So what you might think about as being the difference is the GDPR tells you what you have to do, whereas ISO 27001 gives you a specification for how you can go about doing it. And gives you a specification for how you can go about doing it, both for data protection, but also for any other information or computer-related regulation that you have to comply with. Somebody here kindly says we've been working with the organization recently and they just passed the stage 2 audit. You can get copies of these slides. Yes, they're going out to everybody who's been on the webinar. The GDPR is expected to be agreed by the Commission later on in 2015. The target date is somewhere between spring and the end of summer, and it's expected that it'll go through the European Parliament pretty quickly. So the current expectation is that it will be in force by the end of 2015, and there will be a 2-year period during which organizations will be able to comply with the requirements. And that's the kind of European Union standard. Many organizations will obviously seek to comply earlier. Do we have a list of technology providers that will help you achieve the certification? The answer is you don't need technology so much as you need ISO 27001. Can I suggest you go to the IT governance page that I showed you earlier on our European website, read about ISO 27001. There's a lot of free information available on the website there, and you can identify what you need. At the simplest, all you need is a copy of ISO 27001 itself. It's published by the International Standards Organization in Geneva. You can buy it from any standards body. You can buy it obviously from our own European Union website. The prices are all internationally the same. At the minimum, all you need is a copy of ISO 27001 to know what you have to do. There's a wide range of tools and products. Many of them you can identify from our website, and so I'd point you there as being the first point of call for information about pursuing ISO 27001. Somebody's asking me about software that's available. Again, I just say for the moment, do read about what software is available on our European Union website. That can be helpful. Many organizations use SharePoint, frankly, to manage their documentation because they're using it for other parts of their documentation, so that's a cost-effective way to deal with information. You can get documentation toolkits, obviously the one from IT Governance, which is designed so you can deploy it in SharePoint. Where did Sony fail? It's a good point. They had a very substantial level of investment. They failed because they didn't carry out a global assessment of where their vulnerabilities were, and they didn't put together a global set of requirements which they then enforced on all of their subsidiary companies. What tends to happen with large organizations when they've been breached is they have a kind of knee-jerk reaction, which means that they put in place a set of controls to deal with where they were breached. What they don't do is recognize that they've got a problem across the whole of the organization, particularly if it's a global organization with multiple subsidiaries and operating companies. So if they'd been tackling this right, they would have put a global security team in place, which would have had from the top an authority to ensure that all of the operating divisions and subsidiaries moved very quickly to carry out a detailed risk assessment to identify high priority areas of risk and to protect them. And that might have included looking for things like folders with passwords in clear text. Lead and implement certifications are kind of part of the training that lead implementer and lead audit certifications are part of the training. Yes, that those involved in cybersecurity and ISO 27001 should pursue. And again, I'd just say have a look at either the ISO 27001 page on our website, or go to IBITGQ, which is an examination body for ISO 27001 lead implementer and lead auditor certifications. There are those training courses available again across the internet. IT Governance specifically delivers European-wide lead implementer and lead auditor certified training courses across the internet, which means that organizations and individuals who are looking for those certifications can do the course, they're live online courses, do the course, pass the exam, get the certification without needing to travel to wherever they are. The answer I'm being asked, how do you become a certified lead implementer, is basically you do the lead implementer training course. It's usually a 3-day training course from an experienced training organization, an approved training organization. You do the training course. It's a mixture of lecture and working in a group. Go and have a look, as I said, at the web page that I pointed out, the ISO 27001 page on itgovernance.eu. Look for information about lead implementer. You'll find a description of the lead implementer training course there. You can book a seat on one of the next upcoming training courses. You can do the training course from home or office as is appropriate. You do the exam online, and if you pass, you obviously get the certificate, and you're then a certified information security lead implementer. And that kind of looks like the run of questions has died out just about as we get to the end of the planned time for this certificate, for this webinar. We plan to end at 5 o'clock Central European time, which is pretty well where we are right now. I think that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'd just like to say thank you all for being on this webinar. I hope you found it genuinely useful. If you've got any particular questions you want to ask me or points that you want to raise, please do feel free to email me directly. I'll make sure that either I or one of the team comes back to you as soon as possible. But the key message I'd leave you with is, if you don't think you're cyber secure, you probably aren't, and the sooner you take action, the better it will be for your organization. Cybersecurity, cyber criminals don't take time off. Around the world, there are cyber criminals at work looking for organizations they can hack into. So do take action as soon as you can to make sure that you get yourself secure as soon as you can. Thank you all for being here, and I wish you a good evening.